Part 40. Online game Dungeon Master. Author, Bulletin Lau Bulletin Si Bulletin Me. Chapter 391. On October 3rd, the shore of Falling Star Lake just began to light up, and a gentle breeze blew over the lake. It was a good day. The sleepers stationed on the north bank hurriedly cleaned up the corpses, placed them in coffins, and sent them to the skeleton council next door to be transformed into powerful skeleton warriors. The lake water was red, and there was a faint smell of decay. The lich players on the other side collected the vengeful spirits on the lake and sealed them in small crystal bottles, preparing to use them as materials for casting magic. The junior members of the South African Star were all apprentices. They followed the orders of their mentors to place the bones and rotten meat in fixed positions, draw heptagonal blue magic circles, and then their mentors began to summon undead creatures. After a while, the bones and rotten meat seemed to be alive. The weak ones turned into zombie dogs, and the strong ones combined into hateful warriors. Every time the summoning was successful, the undead army on the training ground would increase a lot. The North Bank seemed very normal, without the atmosphere of war. Except for a small number of people who were awake, most humans were still asleep. Shenxian and Chris looked up at the battlefield below through the sky. It was calm and there was no sign of conspiracy. They looked for a few minutes and then focused their attention on the northern world. It is not a bad thing to operate the north during the war. After all, this plane is a world forgotten by the gods. There are only traces of the god of death. More than 90% of the organizations in the north are backed by demons and devils. The two supported Liu Kei and could stay out of the north without sending troops and suffering any economic losses. Now, the headquarters of the Sunset Society is located in the north corner of the small city in Liu Kei's territory. It has gathered tens of thousands of believers and religious soldiers. The statues of gods everywhere show the prosperity of this place. In order to build the temple, Shenxian flattened a mountain range hundreds of meters high more than 10 kilometers outside the city with a miraculous blow, turning it into a resource point where a giant quarry can be built to bear the stone expenses needed to build the statue. Then he ordered Milo to appoint the archbishop who stayed behind to strictly train the religious soldiers. One is to frequently go out to attack everywhere. You can find the habitats of monsters everywhere in the territory. Weak ones are like freshwater lizards, which are 40 or 50 levels on average. Strong ones can be swamp giants and crocodile kings, which are 70 or 80 levels on average. There are not many monsters around the territory. You only need to pay attention to the inspection, which is very efficient. Or some villages with heretical activities. The Sunset Society will not have mercy on organizations that stretch their hands too far. Another is to climb technology, research the training technology of corresponding professions, and then train them. The primary technology of each profession can increase the unit level by 5 to 10 levels and master several new skills. In addition to increasing the level, the intermediate skills can improve the combat skills mastered by the unit. One is to improve the PK level of the unit, that is, the AI in single combat, and the other is to make the orders issued by the player easier to be executed to adapt to team combat. In addition to supporting Liu Kei internally, they also found many helpers in other places. People's desires are endless. The president of the Chamber of Commerce often wants more gold, and the president of the guild wants more power. Shenxian sent his subordinates, those devils who mastered the skills of deceiving people, to force them to work for him, so even the external obstacles were reduced. The north was under intensive construction. In the south, in a corner of the Falling Star Lake, a player named Judah stood in front of a large group of mercenaries. "Are you ready?" Judah said to the people below, and made a gesture of wishing you good luck to the mercenaries sitting on the 20 bone dragons. The 20 bone dragons slowly flew up, but unfortunately they were not the skeletons of giant dragons. The load of the bone dragons could only carry 4 or 5 mercenaries. A total of 100 mercenaries paid more than 1 million war commissions in advance, which was enough for each mercenary to have a few years of leisure, but every mercenary knew that this might be a mission with no return. Surrounding the bone dragon were hundreds of scavenger birds, several times larger than crows, with an average level of 25. They all flew up at dawn as a cover. "Don't worry," the mercenary sitting on the back of the bone assured his employer and laughed loudly. As the bone dragon flew higher and higher, the mercenary disappeared in the distance. At dawn, a large flock of scavenger birds flew over the falling star lake, which did not arouse anyone's vigilance. No one wanted to offend this aerial creature that was as dangerous as a wolf pack, so as not to be retaliated by the scavenger birds. The bone dragon and mercenaries hiding in the flock of birds relied on cover to get through the most dangerous moment. As they flew over the military camp stationed on the north bank, the bone dragon quickly dived, approaching the ground dozens of meters high, and countless figures then fell from the sky. "Enemy attack," the sleepy guards screamed as their heads were chopped off by the mercenaries. They moved very quickly, running towards several predetermined targets. One was the camp where the enemy commander was located, and the other was the warehouse where the experimental materials were piled. Because they were well prepared, the mercenaries threw out level 5 magic scrolls one after another, releasing fire, lightning or ice attacks. Just 10 minutes later, the camp was in a sea of fire. The camp was in chaos. The level 75 commander was killed by the mercenaries in a few minutes. After completing the attack on the predetermined location, the mercenaries killed their way to the east. This group of mercenaries with an average level of 50 could not confront the regular army head-on, so they could only flee along the road. At this time, the attacked army had just reacted. The captain was busy gathering soldiers and commanding the statistics of losses. Waves of soldiers chased in the direction of the opponent's escape, and magic signals lit up in the sky. The surrounding camps were alerted, but it was too late. When the mercenaries fled, the army on the south bank had already launched a frontal assault on the weak enemy. 100,000 civilian religious soldiers rushed over, first eliminated the scattered patrol teams, and then entered the unprepared camp. The religious army in the south was a real disaster for the army in the north. The strategic location of Loxing Lake is important. With it as the center, it can go straight into the north. The adjacent small countries are all plains, with weak combat effectiveness and no fortresses to defend. If several medium-sized countries in the north gather enough reinforcements, I am afraid that the south will have fallen completely. 6 of the dozen camps along the lake are on the verge of collapse, morale is completely lost, and soldiers are running around. The remaining few are struggling to resist, including the Sunset Society. "My Lord Bishop, I think we may have encountered a master." The young and frivolous man carefully commanded the army to reorganize and counterattack. Even though he usually laughs, his expression is unusually serious. Online game Dungeon Master. Author, Bulletin Lau Bulletin Si Bulletin Me. Chapter 392. Young and frivolous, but experienced, he started playing games at the age of 3 and entered the online game world at the age of 9. In addition, he had a mysterious adventure comparable to the protagonist of a martial arts novel, so his game skills were quite good. Milo just knew that this person could be trusted. Even he said that the opponent was terrible and he didn't need to fight hard. With the blood of Hell Knight and Nether Banshee, he was cunning in his bones. When the opponent attacked, he immediately divided the army into 2 groups, one to delay the enemy, and the other to retreat to a safe place. On that day, the battle on the shore of Falling Star Lake caused the death of more than 40,000 soldiers and the injury of more than 100,000 soldiers. The Southern Church Army took advantage of the victory and pursued the battle line to the north by 50 kilometers. The news soon reached Shenzhen. Nothing could deceive him, so when Milo prayed in his heart and made a prayer, he learned about the sudden change in the south. The Pale Hand dispatched 300,000 troops, but things were not that simple. He secretly ordered Shadow Dragon to investigate in the south, only to find out that a mysterious new force had appeared. A church that I have never seen before. The other party seems to be very rich. They all hire troops. Could it be a subordinate of a god of wealth, such as the newly rising player god? Shen Xian couldn't be sure. After all, he was not a god. He could know the secrets of believers and achieve some special goals through complicated and cumbersome blood sacrifices, but he couldn't appear in every corner of the world instantly and know everything. Chris could. As a newly promoted god, it is necessary to keep a low profile appropriately, otherwise he may be targeted by the dark gods with ill intentions, and he will never be at peace or even fall directly. Or another way is to join a pantheon, an organization protected by the main god. Naturally, no one wants to anger the main god, so there is no security problem, but development is restricted. Risks and opportunities coexist. Chris himself doesn't like to be pointed at by others, so he is an independent god, just like the god of nature, Bertalia. After hearing Shen Xian's words, Chris talked to Shen Xian for a few words, and then stepped into the world of the south on his own. Chris first gave Narvash a dream. As a mercenary, he had no strategy and often liked to solve problems with violence. Therefore, at the critical moment of the defeat of the North, he needed to remind him personally. Chris then uncovered the truth that was covered up, looked down at every corner of the South, and looked for the organization called the Free Alliance that participated in the war. In the riverside city of Sel in a country called Bracada in the southeast of the South, a solemn and sacred cathedral stood beside the bridge, like a lighthouse in the dark. In this country without faith, the Free Alliance can spread its ideas to the world. Faintly discovering the power of a true God there, Chris seemed hesitant and didn't know whether to continue, because he found a special mark, a bone palm that broke out of the ground. Familiar with theology, he knew it was the proof of the God of the dead, and the only explanation for appearing in the religious building of another god was that it symbolized the friendship between the two gods or some special cooperative relationship. Of course, he couldn't offend the god of the dead. There were several gods of death in the dark underworld. They were in charge of different priesthoods. They had one thing in common: they were all terrifying beings above level 175, which was beyond the reach of the new gods of level 150. Chris said to Shen Xian, "Things seem to be a bit troublesome. Could it be that this mysterious god has been recognized by the god of death?" Chris even felt that as long as he dared to understand it in depth, the god of death might appear to stop him or even punish him. Another way to know the truth is to conduct a thorough investigation in all aspects, and guess his true identity by understanding the characteristics, doctrines, magic and other attributes of this god. Only by mobilizing the power of other players, Shen Xian also understood Chris's idea of seeking self-protection. It would take about several million believers to reach a level per week from level 151 to level 152. The territory of the Kingdom of Faith is always changing, and it is impossible to enjoy this upgrade speed every day. After a moment of silence, Shen Xian said, "We cannot interfere in the wars of mortals, but we can guide them. Think of a way, Chris. There are two things, one is war, and the other is the truth." Shen Xian decided to send people. The number of level 10 administrators under the door is 512, the 11th level is 1024, and the 12th level is doubled. Using lower level personnel to investigate the forum and the clues left on the website is a way to save costs. In the game, as mentioned earlier, investigate the origin of this god and other information. God can sense the birth of a god. In addition, if it is a player, there is also a world broadcast, which is not difficult to infer. Based on the current information, it seems more like the players did it. The style of the Free Alliance is obviously not like the Dark Gods. The actions and developments are varied. An NPC god usually has a personality similar to his priesthood. For example, disaster corresponds to irritability, justice represents kindness, and nature represents kindness. Only players will show something different from the priesthood. Of course, it is just speculation at present, and the truth is unknown. Another guideline is that in order to defeat the religious army in the south, a sufficiently strong reinforcement must be sent. However, it should be clear that the purpose of the Sunset Society is not to defend their homeland, but to establish a sufficient reputation base and quickly build a strong army through war. This is the real purpose of the Sunset Society getting involved in the war when it was not so powerful. On the afternoon of October 3, the religious army that was dispersed and retreated to the north and chose to camp near the woods received Shen Xian's revelation. Milo left alone, leaving the young and frivolous to command the battle. The young and frivolous was a little confused and wanted to follow, but unfortunately he was stopped by a voice, an existence that could not be resisted, so he could only arrange defense in depression. He first ordered the army to build a new barracks, and then contacted the nearby lords to collect resources. In wartime, having an army means having power. The local lords did not have to fall out with him for a few resources, so hundreds of thousands of wood and food were moved away, and the young and frivolous had the capital to continue fighting. Milo walked into a mountain, and he received an oracle telling him that the secret to fighting the south was in the deep mountains. Shen Xian could not intervene personally every time. As his level got higher and higher, the damage he caused to mortals became greater and greater. A demigod could easily destroy a city. Naturally, the gods were more powerful and could not casually deal with mortals. Demons and devils do not have to abide by the above agreement. The problem is, which demon in history did not die young after massacring a city? If you want to inflict terror, you need to be planned and organized. It seems that the three masters are the role models he needs to learn from. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Online game Dungeon Master. Author, Bulletin Lao Bulletin Si Bulletin Me. Chapter 393. Milo's thin body walked towards the depths of the valley filled with poisonous gas. As a practitioner of dark magic and divine arts, he did not have the strong physique of a warrior, and his long-distance journey was very slow. Moreover, he could not rely on the help of demons. The revelation given to him by the gods included this one, which was a double test for his mind and body. There was never light around him. The clouds were extremely thick in this world, blocking the light, but he who mastered the dark vision did not need light to illuminate his way forward. He hated light. After walking for several days and nights, not knowing how the war was going, Milo believed in the existence of the one who guided him out of his difficult childhood, so he had no doubt that as long as he faithfully completed his mission, the Sunset Society could resist the enemy's northward advance. He was in danger several times and encountered several terrible and powerful monsters. For him who did not have a strong body protection, he needed to remain vigilant at all times in order not to be regarded as prey. He quickly reached level 60. On this day, he reached the deepest part of the valley, where he found a long sealed rock door. He walked in and found an isolated underground city, covered in dust. It looked like no one had been there for hundreds of years. The dry environment prevented the human corpses here from rotting and turning them into extremely shriveled corpses. Of course, what surprised him most was the black magic marks that could be seen everywhere. This underground city should be a very famous dark gathering place, but it disappeared in history for some unknown reason. Finally, he found hundreds of weak nightmares in it, horse-sized, often black fur with red luster, mane, and dangerous creatures with hellfire burning on their hooves. He gave them the blood and souls he had prepared in advance as gifts and ordered them to be loyal to him. The nightmares were unwilling to obey this weak human at first, because each nightmare was a descendant of Ymir, the most powerful race in hell, and had innate pride and self-confidence. Unfortunately, the life without freedom bound the nightmare. Milo threatened to either continue sleeping or obey. The Nightmare finally agreed and followed him out of the dungeon. Then came the reorganization. Nightmares have no wings, but they can fly in the sky. They are masters of creating illusions and intelligent creatures like shadow dragons. Nightmares and humans can become the second-level Nightmare Knights, a strong profession in the air, with sufficient output attacks and several curses. You must know that if you encounter negative states such as deceleration and stun in the air and are controlled, the end is generally very tragic. Generally, only in large countries may there be air forces, and there may be air wars. For example, the Tower of Silence has a lost gargoyle puppet army, because the training cost of the Air Force is high, unlike the regular army, which can form a certain number, and the lethality is not as terrible as the aircraft in modern warfare, and it will be shot by magic and crossbows. However, relying on the advantages of speed and skills, the Nightmare Knight can restrain the Southern Army. Let's talk about the Free Alliance first. Mercenaries like to use airdrops to carry out rapid attacks. A responsive army with control skills is their natural enemy. It can block the mercenaries before they are airdropped, and the effect is excellent. On the Pale Hand side, there are 300,000 religious soldiers, including 5 soul warrior regiments, 10 heavy infantry regiments, 2 priest regiments, and 2 archer regiments. Because the Pale Hand's belief is not based on protection, it is determined that there are no knights. The 2 strongest talents they master are that they can continue to fight after death, and the other is not afraid of corpse poison and plague. In this regard, the speed advantage of the Nightmare Knight is obvious, especially against infantry, and for the 2 elite archer regiments, there has never been a perfect army in the world, and there is no unchanging tactics. As long as it is used properly, such a legion built at a cost of nearly 10 million gold is enough to complete many tasks. Milo is stepping up the training of the new army. He selected a group of loyal and fanatical believers from the Sunset Society as the pioneers of the Nightmare Knights, and let them test them in the dangerous environment of countless cliffs and bird habitats. This kind of training method is primitive and rough, with a very high mortality rate. For fanatical believers who ignore life and death, this is the simplest way for them to quickly break through their limits. October 6th. In the Virtual Conference Center, a small conference room, there are more than 10 players sitting inside, including Shenxian, Chris, Lauke, and even a few players at the grassroots level. Those grassroots administrators often find it difficult to participate in meetings of this level. The strict confidentiality system limits the communication between the 2 sides. They seem extremely excited, but as the voice of the second-level administrator sounded, the gentle atmosphere of the entire conference room changed. It became very solemn and formal. Let me first talk about the war situation in the other dimension. The Pale Hand, which has no cavalry available, is now slowing down its advance. It has penetrated more than 300 kilometers north of Falling Star Lake and is conquering several large cities. It is being delayed by supply and reinforcement issues. The total number of troops attacking the north is 260,000, bringing together a large number of young soldiers from 3 medium-sized countries and 10 small countries in the south. On the other hand, the rising Free Alliance has dispatched 40,000 teaching soldiers, 2/3 of whom are experienced mercenaries. More than a dozen countries in the north have recruited 200,000 new soldiers and summoned hundreds of thousands of undead legions. It will take about 2 to 3 days to complete the formal assembly. The number of northern troops still resisting is 70,000, only half of the number that participated in the Battle of Falling Star Lake. After the second-level administrator introduced, he did not immediately start discussing the war, but a subordinate administrator who was engaged in information intelligence collection spoke up. Let me introduce the results of the investigation. According to the investigation, a deleted log written by a company employee involving the investigation was found on the internal website of an Israeli company called Coop. This is a company engaged in antique auctions. It has always been doing quite well, operating normally and stably. The company has no plans to set up an online game department. It can be speculated that it is an internal guild of the company. On the other hand, because of the special mechanism of the country, we can extract relevant achievement information, but we cannot understand the true identity of the player, and cannot further verify and trace the clues. At present, Coop's financial situation is public, there is no discrepancy in the amount, and no company employees are on the blacklist. There should be no conspiracy against us behind the scenes. Online game DungeonMaster. Author, Bulletin Lau Bulletin Si Bulletin Me. Chapter 394. Was it just an accident? The players present were thinking about it. Of course they would not believe the investigation results. They should listen to the internal investigation of the game and then decide what to do. After all, having an additional competitor, especially a strong competitor, would bring difficulties to Faith's development plan. It's going to cause a lot of trouble. Another administrator stood up. He is a small boss of a game studio. He is an African. He brings a lot of foreign exchange income to his country every year in the poor place of Congo. His activities have been in the alien world for a long time. It's been a while. He said, we have tried to conduct a large-scale investigation by sending personnel, including Sayre City and 15 surrounding cities. Unfortunately, because the local area is relatively xenophobic and the inspection of adventurers is very strict, we did not obtain much intelligence. There is a level 9 divine magic barrier scattered across the city of Sayre. This is an eternal spell, so those with evil intentions can easily be found out, regardless of their level. The first point is that the Freedom Alliance is indeed a very united organization. It manages its members very strictly. The number of players wearing the guild flag basically maintains a fixed number, which is very consistent with the clues in reality mentioned above. The second point is that the Freedom Alliance is not only active locally, but also distributed in other places. However, the other party does not seem to know the details of the gods and only obtains the gods' gifts through a method similar to an oracle. In another country, we found several branches of the Free Alliance. Because they were not involved in the war, they developed rapidly. Unfortunately, the other party's defenses were stricter than that of Sayre City, so we were unable to obtain any information. The origin of this god is unknown. It can only be inferred from the fact that the priesthood can improve the city's satisfaction. Those who meet the conditions include several harvest, law, entertainment, and more than a dozen priesthoods. The remaining players whispered that the breakthrough of the problem seemed to be in reality. Of course, even if they did not understand the opponent's purpose, they still had to fight this war. The competition for the Kingdom of Faith is extremely fierce. Finding an unexplored world is not as simple as it seems. Most of the twisting voids may lead to endless abyss and hell, or barren plains without life. The chance of leading to a normal world that complies with the laws of the main material plane is very small. So when the noise died down, the second-level administrators started assigning tasks. There are 7 players in this plane, and there are 2 titled Earls, one is Old K and the other is Falcon. The Sunset Society will send out another mixed legion, an elite team of Nightmare Knights, Dragon Vein will send out a Bone Dragon Legion, and the 2 players will each send out a legion. In this way, the coalition forces of the 2 major churches will not be able to move further north. The coalition forces did not act together with the new recruits from the north. They were not obliged to obey anyone's command. Rather than obeying an NPC or a player they did not trust, they might become cannon fodder. Players preferred to control the situation by themselves. Coop is not well known in affluent Israel. The company's more than 300 employees generate an annual revenue of about 290 million. Compared with the industry, they are just one company with almost no overseas branches. However, Coop grew very quickly. Relying on the hard-working and shrewd nature of the Jewish people, it only took 2 years for Coop to grow. The company's president, Simon Fay, firmly believes that as long as there is an opportunity, they will achieve new growth. Recently, things seem to be turning around for Coop. A mysterious company wants Coop to be responsible for handling a batch of ancient cultural relics salvaged from the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. According to calculations by valuation experts, this batch of goods can fetch at least more than 4 billion yuan. Coop Company was full of joy. With 4 billion yuan, they had no reason to give up or look down on it. Simonfi immediately held a mobilization meeting and then plunged into intense work. Each employee works voluntarily for more than 10 hours, which greatly reduces the game time in Coop Nation. Of course, it is worthwhile to do so. The money earned can make up for the losses in the game, right? Coop did not realize that this was a special test. After the Free Alliance's defenses in Sale were greatly weakened, the player was almost certain of the relationship between the Free League and Coop. During the conversation with Shimonfi, he learned about the company's treatment of employees. The gaming life has strict requirements. For example, game-related information should not be released within the company, which explains the reason why the log was deleted. During the cooperation, they also learned a lot of useful information. For example, there are messages about some gods, such as the relationship between the god and the god of death. The god of death seems to admire this god very much. The other is the description of the god, not the appearance of an old man, no different from a young man. Through this information, players searched for the gods in the kingdom of the gods and locked several of them. At the same time, in the important northern cities of Gamania and Kazan, the second fierce battle between the north and the south began. Since the northward advance, the teaching soldiers have been divided into two groups for crusade. Nearly 150,000 troops have surrounded two cities 200 kilometers apart. On the other hand, the coalition forces of the sect, including not only members of the sect, but also allies made in the game, quickly attacked the south area. Ignoring the recent call for help from Kazan City, the three light-moving legions quickly passed through the occupied area and directly attacked the southern teaching army stationed on the north bank of Falling Star Lake. They quickly defeated the army here with a sneak attack and restabilized the area. Safety. The Dragonvein Society's Bone Dragon Corps was not the giant dragon corpse in the sky as people imagined, but a group of 4 or 5 meter long ground dragons. A total of 3,000 dead ground dragons were resurrected as bones, each carrying 3 to 4 soldiers using javelins, sweeping across the battlefield like tanks. It was like a sweep, the earth was flattened, very spectacular and imposing. The Nightmare Knight did not get a chance to appear, and then it was the Sleeper and the Soul Eater's performance time. The mixed army used the speed advantage to flexibly pursue the fleeing soldiers, and the 40,000 strong army was almost wiped out. The raid surprised both sides. No one thought that the coalition would attack the south regardless of the safety of important cities. However, considering that most of the members of the coalition were not domestic lords, whether to rescue them would not be punished or beneficial, the commander of the reinforcements was relieved. Nearly 300,000 southern troops were trapped in the north. A few days later, 200,000 new soldiers sent by several major powers were put into battle to lift the siege of the two cities. On the other side, the coalition forces blocked the strategic location of Loxing Lake in the north and south, blocking food supply and military reinforcements. It seems that the Northern Army is in a difficult battle. In fact, trapped beasts are the most terrifying. The outcome of the war is still uncertain. Temporarily maintain 2 updates, it's hot and I'm restless without air conditioning. Online game DungeonMaster. Author, Bulletin Lao Bulletin Si Bulletin Me. Chapter 395. In the Mage Tower group in the north of Dusk City, several serious-looking mages accompanied Miss Xiao, who looked like an archmage and was dressed in gold lace and all white, into the alchemy laboratory. However, unlike the most basic alchemy laboratory, the alchemy laboratory located in the center not only includes a large number of small laboratories prepared for apprentices to experiment and make, but also includes an ancient refining factory excavated from the Gate of Elements. A six-sided box suspended above the head, pulled by several mithril chains, is like the treasure box of the goddess of disaster, with many terrible secrets hidden inside. There was nothing in the box, except for a mysterious boulder shining with 7 colors, about the size of a human being. A trace of magic power passed through the intersections and bifurcations in 27 directions and finally reached the center of the box. Standing in the distance, you can observe everything in the box through the crystal ball. In addition to Miss Xiao, there are also several archmages from neighboring cities and several players from Twilight City. They are fortunate enough to participate in this historic event. With a slight nod, the second in command of Twilight City said to Nikas and Springer, who were standing in the distance, "Let's get started, my two great scholars." It seemed that they were a little excited, and a goblin and a dwarf couldn't control their excited hands. However, in just a moment, they simultaneously launched the most mysterious skill in alchemy, turning a large iron block as tall as a man. Sent to the box. Standing next to Miss Xiao stood a gentle young man holding magic pattern paper, nervously recording data one by one. A mage was also a mathematician. They were extremely sensitive to numbers. They were busy working, and when the treasure box contained, the players' mouths opened wide when the substance turned into particles of invisible primitive matter and transformed into a large piece of yellow gold in front of people's surprised eyes. In Twilight City, on the prosperous streets, are several distinguished guests riding dragons to tour the streets. Since the White Cloud Club participated in the peripheral affairs of Twilight City, there have been more tourists from all over the world. They can enjoy the ridiculous lessons of the underground city warriors. Through the performance of treasure hunters on the surface, you can appreciate the beautiful and varied underground scenery and natural scenery. There are approximately more than 1,000 tourists visiting this big city with a population of more than 300,000. Suddenly, a dazzling golden light lit up in the center of a large group of icy blue or red and black mage towers overhead. Unlike the sun, which made the underground world tremble and fear, what dissipated in this energy was a kind of peace and new life, as if the light, which is not yet strong at dawn, immerses every player in the sudden burst of amazement. It's so wonderful. If one day I can get married under such a dreamy scenery, I think I would be willing to do so. One player seemed to express the sentiments of all the witnesses. Miss Xiao asked for detailed data on the second-level material transformation technology. The higher the level of things, the fewer the explanations given. Just like the sudden increase in the number of appraisals required in the epic and legendary levels, it is a process of change. The young man from the Felon Accounting Office quickly reported the numbers: 383 units of unsmelted iron ore, including 287 units of iron and 96 units of stone, converted into 283 units of gold. The value has increased approximately 100 times, and the losses in other aspects are negligible. Then copper to iron, magic crystal to gemstone, fur to weapon. One piece of data was being tested, and 80 million was invested in an epic technology to complete the second level of research. People standing in the alchemy laboratory witnessed this historic moment. In the kingdom of dragon god Kalando, Shen Xian kneels down on a three-dimensional map like a sandbox and plays with the chess pieces. With the power, he can directly control it with his mind and photograph objects from a distance. In the north are the troops of Kuzan City and Gamania, in the center are the coalition forces in the Falling Star Lake area, and in the south are a large number of gathering points of the Freedom Alliance. He wondered whether he needed to find a behind-the-scenes devil who was deeply interested in the belief in the alien plane to participate in order to balance the strength of both parties. After all, the name of the other party's god of death was too scary, even if he was not a member of the human pantheon. Death remains an object that cannot be offended. It's just that their income in this plane will be greatly reduced. Hateful, greedy, angry, and arrogant souls will have difficulty meeting his needs. It is really a difficult problem to solve. Or make the gods fight with each other. Shen Xian thought, and seemed to have thought of a way to divert the other party's attention. Christopher jumped out, like a magic lamp, first a cloud of smoke, and finally transformed into a human form. Unfortunately, the human form had legs, which made him look quite weird. He said, "My dear Lord, Twilight City's material transformation technology seems to have been successful. Your lovely beauty spent nearly 100 million in gold to complete this technology. Of course I know this, but there is still some time before it can be put into practical application. Is there any problem?" Shen Xian stood up. "I think we can cooperate. I recently bought a demi-plane from a plane merchant, but you also know that growing an empty demi-plane requires countless investments and expenses. And material transformation is very helpful for the growth of the demi-plane, right?" Shen Xian answered his words and understood. Indeed, the demi-plane is completely blank after it grows. We can develop faith in it earlier than anyone else. He pondered for a while Christopher chattered about how much money his family had. Although the woman over there in Twilight City was the richest woman in the world, he was not bad at all and could definitely provide huge help. To build a demi-plane, various factors are needed. Just like what is said in Genesis, the world is empty and chaotic. There must be light and darkness, earth, water, fire, and wind. Lord, you know, I am a new god, and I am not good at it. Even for a great god, it is not easy. I must get relevant data on technology, otherwise the demi-plane may still be in its infancy when the kingdom ends. The two discussed for a long time. The demi-plane he bought from the plane merchant with great effort is now the size of a lake. There are natural climate changes in it, and it is still a long way from the main material plane. Finally, after a calculation that actually took only a moment, Chris gave a price. To pay for it, the thousands of messy materials needed for the growth of the demi-plane all need to be provided by Dusk City. The two men cast their eyes towards the mainland. A new religious army in the south was rushing to the north to provide emergency assistance. Just a few hours ago, a soul warrior group as the vanguard launched a sneak attack on the army blocked by the coalition forces. The method was quite perverted, which was carried out by diving. Soul warriors have the characteristics of undead creatures, such as not consuming much food, not breathing, and not bleeding. Therefore, all 10,000 soul warriors jumped into the water and touched the north bank. Originally, this method was quite brilliant, but unfortunately, the young and frivolous were quite shameless. They did not forget to place a certain number of traps and patrol guards on the shore. As a result, the matter was exposed in advance and they were annihilated. It was a pity for these poor soldiers. The coalition forces were actually under greater pressure. The reinforcements from the south were not the kind of goods temporarily trained in the north. They had the fanatics closest to the gods. They were called the Forgotten, with an average level of 65 and a total of 2,000. Maybe it's time to avoid the sharp edge for a while. Shen Xian thought about ordering Milo and Nian Shaoqingquang not to confront each other head-on. On the other hand, a missed message appeared in his communication message bar. He connected to a special VIP number. The logo page has a special tiger symbol with an ancient style. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Online game Dungeon Master. Author, Bulletin Lao Bulletin Si Bulletin Me. Chapter 396. Mercenaries are an excellent way to conceal their identities. The rules of the industry are that the employer's information must not be disclosed, which is almost the same as the assassin world, but mercenaries do more things, such as the one in front of them, the largest mercenary organization in the virtual world, Fengguo. VIP privileges allow Shen Xian to enjoy special services when he logs in. He enters another virtual world, the quaint China, standing on the third floor of a restaurant facing the river, with several elegant ladies standing beside him. This tone makes Shen Xian a little embarrassed. Unless he is an experienced person, he can completely ignore a group of beauties. Today he came to discuss business. The street market under his feet is responsible for small things, such as hunting down a small force and investigating the information of a player, but the restaurant is full of big things, some of which may require the participation of millions of players, and some involve commissions of up to hundreds of millions of yuan. The other party is a senior staff member of Feng Guo who manages the pandimensional affairs of the country. He came to receive him because of his VIP qualification. Quite capable, the two sat opposite each other to discuss specific matters as soon as they came up. Shen Xian has two goals. One is to launch an opposition movement in the plane forgotten by the gods, such as creating famine and plague to force the satisfaction of the territory to decline, so that the Lord can't concentrate and continue the war. He needs to use various means to interfere with the war. Although he doesn't know how long the North can hold on, judging from the fact that the South has not completely eliminated the undead wizards in the North must have something extraordinary. But by that time, the Sunset Society will not be the protagonist in this war, but the monarch of the North. If you want to expand, it is difficult without fame, and war is the best way to get it. The door is short of manpower and cannot carry out large-scale operations. Besides, large-scale operations are easy to be monitored. It can only be done through other methods, and hiring Feng Guo is a good idea. Feng Guo has a low entry threshold, so Feng Guo has tens of millions of mercenaries. In a country where the birth point is random and difficult to gather, only Feng Guo can gather a certain number of players at any time and at any place. The other is to be carried out in any plane where the god of death is active. He recently received a prophecy that a terrible religious war will break out in a large plane in a few days, and a divine weapon will be born. This is a world equivalent to half the size of the main material plane, with a population of hundreds of millions. The Spartan cult on the continent, which hates the pale hand, belongs to another god in the dark underworld. It is a fellow sect war. As an outsider, Shen Xian, who has the ability to know, naturally needs to add fuel to the fire, expand the scale of the religious war and distract most of the god of death's energy. This also requires the use of mercenaries, and cannot simply invite studios, because there is no fixed target, so it is directly posted through the beacon in the form of tasks. As long as the studios and individuals who are interested will naturally choose to complete it and achieve Shen Xian's goal. One day later, many countries in the south. After the conspiracy of players in several countries, several incidents against local lords have occurred. Unfortunately, since the lords involved are only a few knights, it has not affected the overall situation. A famine in a country in the afternoon caused problems in the operation of the country. Nearly 1 million grains were destroyed. The serious famine in the country was reflected in all aspects, making it impossible for the country to continue the war. Due to the support of allied countries, the impact was not large. The incident aroused the vigilance and attention of the Archbishop of the Pale Hand, and sent people to assist. For this business, Shen Xian posted a small task worth about 30 million and two large tasks worth 160 million and 110 million respectively. In general, it was very attractive. After some players received tens of thousands of rewards, the enthusiasm of the players continued to escalate after a few days. More and more things happened, which gradually made the lords in the south bury themselves in the continuous incidents in various places. Many of them were even the masterpieces of the lords who embezzled, so the defense against the north was much loosened. The door took the opportunity to enter and conduct a detailed investigation. At once, several locations where the Free Alliance was scattered were dug out. This was all information that could not be obtained through normal means. Through the information, it was discovered that this god was hiding very cleverly. It was as if he was against them and didn't want them to know any information that could be used to prove the truth. The truth does not necessarily require evidence. Generally speaking, players can guess who is fanning the flames. A larger-scale war was taking place in the area of Loxing Lake. In order to support the Northern Army, the elite of the church sent by the South, the coalition forces that were inferior in both quantity and quality, had to think of another way, so they sent out 50,000 mercenaries. Mercenaries are not very useful on the front battlefield. Unless there are a few large mercenary groups, mercenaries of dozens of people are more suitable for guerrilla warfare. But mercenaries are the source of crisis for the church soldiers. About 1,000 players participated in this mission. They only need to kill an ordinary soldier to get 100 gold, and killing a fanatic is 800 gold. Each profession is clearly marked, which makes many of the most confident players very active. Under normal circumstances, surprise attacks on the enemy would of course be useless, but there were two ways to solve the problem. One was to form a group of several thousand people. Even if the enemy had patrols, as long as you seized the right opportunity to launch a surprise attack, you could easily earn tens of thousands of gold. The second is through magic. The power of magic above level 9 is terrifying. With a few minutes of preparation time and expensive materials, this challenge can be completed by using magic reasonably. When the religious soldiers are in trouble, there is no way to encircle and suppress them. The opponent often observes from a distance. Once the religious army makes an action to attack the mercenaries, the free mercenaries can come and go freely. Unfortunately, compared with the mercenaries who once raided in the south, the players participating now are relatively ordinary, and the tactics are relatively rigid. You can tell at a glance that they are ordinary players. Because of the existence of mercenaries, the pressure on Milo and Nian Shaoking's shoulders is much less. While thanking the gods, they fought several battles with the army blocked in the south, most of which ended in a draw. The war lasted for 2 weeks in a blink of an eye. There is no reason why it would not work if it cost a lot of money. The religious army in the south was beaten to pieces. The morale was much lower than when it went out. Moreover, after the players' repeated sneak attacks, the remaining army was only 80,000. With 80,000 relatively elite troops and the siege in the north not yet lifted, the war has progressed to this point, and it is probably time for the forces behind the scenes on both sides to show up. Online game Dungeon Master. Author, Bulletin Lao Bulletin Si Bulletin Me. Chapter 397. On the promontory of the Twilight Peninsula in the south, angry waves violently hit the sudden cliffs, the wind howled, and several metal boats with strong pointed tips quietly approached the shore. Dozens of players with an average level of 70 jumped out of the boat and entered a cave hidden in the depths. In the cave grew huge mushrooms that emitted cold fluorescence. The players divided the monsters and eliminated them in an orderly manner. Some were responsible for attracting monsters, and some were responsible for attracting monsters. There are people in charge of investigation and logistics, and the cooperation is quite tacit. The scenery gradually changes, and you go deep underground along the dark passage. Everything is like a dream. Even so, the participating players still look serious. An undead player standing at the front was holding a rough map painted in blood, guiding the player on the way forward. A player next to him asked, "Noah, is Hardy's Mage Tower really hidden here?" The player named Noah immediately replied, "Yes, it must be completed even without us. There is a special treasure that has not been deciphered so far in Hardy's Necronomicon laboratory. This is the goal of our action." The players around him know what they are interested in and don't ask any more questions. There is always a price to pay for knowing too much. He knows his status and responsibilities, so he will never consider issues that only big people think about. As the team went deeper, several mages on 2 large ships moored on the shore tasted the newly prepared magic juice and regained their spirits while continuing to monitor the crystal ball. Operation Normal. Sunday. No one knew what the mages were saying, but it could be seen that their lips moved, as if telepathically. A new response came from the other side of distant time and space. Keep paying close attention, the holy crown of the Lord of Death is extremely important to us, the voice said inside. Quickly, another mage who used a crystal ball to monitor the battlefield said, the battle situation is still stalemate. Recently, the god of death is not very interested in the struggle for faith in this world, but he has sent his apprentice, the great god of plague, to guide this world. A war. After reporting on the new progress, it was the turn of the third mage. The third facial mage had a more elegant look on his brows. His name was Steel. There was a violent fluctuation in the crystal ball monitored by level 117 Steel, and then a terrible explosion appeared in the field of vision. Meteorites carrying disaster and disaster fell from the sky, as if the angry roar of the gods were tearing the sky apart for punishment. Mortals who offended him. This is the battlefield south of Gamania, and an undiscovered army has appeared. It seems to be composed of players from several northern countries. Steel introduced the situation calmly. The opponent launched a level 12 spell, and the commander in charge of the siege of Carmenia made an unforgivable mistake, not placing enough sentries just in case, let alone using magic. Barriers protect important locations. It can be speculated that the sudden appearance of this group of troops deceived the sentries in the central region, and the sentries deployed along the road also need to be investigated. The other party was silent for a while. Just don't interrupt the plan to protect the holy crown of the Death Lord. As for us, we can also conduct a raid at the right time. You don't need to solve the mistakes made by the players. In the north, due to the poor combat quality and low level of the trained recruits, the plan to rescue the two big cities has never been successful, and even tens of thousands of people were wiped out by the other side. This made the commanders of several countries who wanted to take action just adopt an attitude of encirclement without taking the initiative to attack. They knew clearly that the Church's army could not set foot on this desecrated land, and no one could be saved, so there was almost no dispute among the generals in the general direction. By taking risks and contacting the city lord in the city, the food supply can still last for a few months. The problem is that the city defense facilities are about to collapse after being destroyed day and night. Things don't seem to be going anywhere. The main road in southern Gamania is flat and wide, and is the only way for countless caravans traveling from north to south. On this day, the sky was always shrouded in thick clouds, there was no wind, and the surroundings seemed very calm. To the north was the garrison of the teaching army. Location: a little further north are reinforcements from several countries. The big-headed orc held his sword and followed a mercenary team forward quickly. He is a transformed undead. He was an orc during his lifetime, but now he is a skeleton swordsman. After more than half a year of serious leveling, he has now reached level 60 and can be sold. Level 60 is basically the lowest level for mercenaries in Fengguo. If it is any lower, it will be too easy to die, and the price is not high. The welfare of this era is much better than before. The cost of medical treatment and education is not high, but that does not mean that money has lost its role. He thought about his son who still needed to spend money, licked his lips, and finally removed the beneficial effects on his body. Thousands of mercenaries appeared almost at the same time. They were originally shrouded in shadow, and even the elves could hardly detect them from a few hundred meters away, but they suddenly appeared on the road, several hundred meters away from the instructors in front. A simple and practical group invisibility technique costs an average of 200 gold to hide a person. Such a spell usually does not go undiscovered for such a long time. However, this is the case. They realize that even devout religious soldiers will make mistakes. Therefore, it was easy to deceive the unprepared army. A few hundred meters away was a suitable location for a sneak attack. Any closer would easily lead to malicious detection by magicians. The wizard in front summoned several huge earth elementals and rushed into the barracks. Then, the big-headed orcs followed. One soldier was worth 100 gold. He was level 60, which was enough to kill a dozen of them. It was early morning, and except for an elite group of the Forsaken, all the soldiers were sleeping. The sudden terrible sound of fighting made many soldiers sweat as if they had woken up from a nightmare. They hurriedly put on armor and took up weapons. Under the command of the captain, they fought with the enemy. Unlike the newcomers in the north and the half-dead people in the city, this was a group of troops dressed in very scattered clothes, with different weapons and equipment. They looked like mercenaries. Those who despise them will pay the price. Most of them are players. They fight for money. As long as they kill an enemy, they will get 100 gold. Compared with other places, many players are happy that such a good thing can come to this plane. Players are not afraid of death. They can get hundreds of dollars. What does it matter if they die and lose a level? Even if they lose a few levels, what does it matter? Everyone will calculate this account. When the first batch of several thousand mercenaries entered the military camp, a second batch appeared a moment later, with several thousand more people. In addition, the Northern Army heard that they wanted to take advantage of the situation, and the mercenaries who were no longer worried about death began to act recklessly. A group of enemies who were not afraid of life and death were terrible. The big-headed orc had red blood and his potion was used up, but he was still fighting hard. "I will fight you," he shouted loudly, and used a skill with his sword. While circling with the soldiers on the opposite side, he blocked the attacks from several directions and killed another soldier in seconds. There were waves of terrible sounds in his ears. He looked up and the sky was blood red. Online game Dungeon Master. Author, Bulletin Lau Bulletin Si Bulletin Me. Chapter 398. The terrifying 12th level magic engulfed the camp that stretched for several kilometers. On the flat plain, except for a few soldiers who released shields to resist, flames were burning everywhere. Each unit attacked by the meteorite will suffer 2,000 to 3,400 damage, followed by a spreading fire that will consume the army in the flames at a rate of 85 points per second. A big deal. I wonder which player made it? The big-headed orc thought. He knew that the minimum condition for releasing 12th level magic was 110, and it required a lot of materials. It could only be used once every few days in reality. Although the standard could be lowered through cooperation, no one among the mercenaries would have the ability to gather so many people. In just a few minutes, more than 1,000 soldiers died under the majesty of 12th level magic. When the fire was extinguished, it was estimated that the number of casualties could reach more than 5,000. Such a deal could earn 500,000 gold. The big-headed orc thought about it and looked envious. The army surrounding GameElements has undergone a dramatic change, and this matter has not been missed by Sunday. He sat at a desk, thinking with his head held high. How to solve this problem? At a time when the battle for faith is fierce, the 9 major banks do not support large-scale exchange. Do they also need to fight a war of exchanging money for faith like the sect? Unfortunately, the 9 major banks are on a different path from them. Some of them have established aristocratic families with a long history, and some are financial centers of major countries and are controlled by the government. Therefore, even if heaven is strong, it does not mean that it has mastered everything unless the world is integrated. He thought about it and found that there was no problem with the method, because they could not deploy manpower like the sect, or it was a bit of a waste of talent to put the top manpower on this kind of war. Sun has only 2 goals. One is to complete the ultimate pre-branch task assigned by the Order Association and take away the Holy Crown of the Death Monarch. The other is to test whether the head of the opponent's family has built enough power. A middle-aged woman appeared on the virtual screen in front of him, the head of a security company in New Zealand. Mrs. Newman, have those guys been complaining to you lately that there is nothing to do? The woman opposite immediately responded with a kind smile, "Sir, maybe it's time to find them some work." Sun then stated his request, allowing the players of this security company to participate first. After all, Bodyguards who have received rigorous training always have some advantages in playing online games. They are disciplined and energetic, can fight in the game for a long time, and are easy to command in large-scale battles, so Sun gave them the main task. Then there are mercenaries. Just like the other party uses the coalition as the main force and mercenaries as the auxiliary, Sun also issued a war mission of up to 230 million to Feng Guo. 200 gold to eliminate a northern soldier, 1,500 gold to eliminate a captain, the same clear price. In terms of economic power, heaven can be said to be rich and powerful. Sun asked the lady to be responsible for the release. He didn't like to appear in person because heaven's information technology was relatively backward, so he always acted behind the scenes, especially in real affairs, even if the other party had long guessed that he was playing tricks. Recently, two completely opposite orders appeared on Feng Guo, which made the billions of players in the country find that two fierce players were fighting each other. However, because Sun controls the price of the former, it is very convenient to impress players through price. Sun knows the price offered by the other party and easily responds with a price war. It is not difficult for him to throw out hundreds of millions. The gradually increasing war commission has aroused the interest of many large player organizations. For large organizations, it is not worth their effort if there is no war commission of tens of millions. And as the level increases, the appearance fee of high-level players will become higher and higher. A few hundred golds are not enough for repair and maintenance. Naturally, they cannot participate in the war at a loss. Because Sun offers a very high treatment, many players who participated in the war changed sides overnight. Some even worked on both sides and got money from both sides. They can't tell who they are working for. They were in conflict at first, but then things changed. Players began to target the other side's NPCs. NPC soldiers were easier to kill, so players who liked to speculate organized themselves and cooperated with each other. You lured some NPCs over, and he lured some NPCs over, and everyone was happy. Of course, most of the time it was normal. Players were not able to easily transfer troops that did not belong to them, and they could not access military intelligence. Things gradually developed in the direction expected by both sides. The number of participating mercenaries increased to more than 100,000, and gradually turned into a direct military confrontation. The long-term war made the North and South countries feel a little tired. Even the gods could not afford the huge consumption of manpower and material resources. Both sides wanted to cease fire, but they were unwilling to end it first because of dignity. Shen Xian stayed in Chris's kingdom of God. After a period of expansion, his kingdom of God became quite huge, accommodating many wonderful creatures from various planes. Unfortunately, the Holy Spirit, a symbol of faith, did not appear. The demi-plane that Chris bought grew much faster after studying the material conversion technology, and quickly separated day and night, earth and air. Unfortunately, it was still empty and there were no living creatures. This was a shelter for Shen Xian that was not discovered by anyone. He looked down at the world under his feet. The territory of faith has expanded a lot. The Sunset Society and the Dragon Vein Society spread from one country to another like a virus, with amazing efficiency. During the war, few lords were willing to obstruct their actions. They even hoped to improve satisfaction, prosperity, and civilization through faith to stabilize the territory. Therefore, he had about 100,000 believers in this alien plane. In the other world, there were only more than 10 million. There were still many gods watching there. There was no way to continue to develop and they were facing sanctions at any time. He cast his eyes to another place, a seaside in the south, thinking about how long he would have to wait for the other party to dig out the holy crown of the Death Monarch. This is a legendary treasure, a terrible thing left by the Lich King. It carries 3 curses, but after wearing it, you can control countless undead. One of the attributes can increase the effect of undead magic by 50%, which means that the original 100 skeletons can be summoned to 150. Another attribute is that the loyalty of the undead is increased by 20 points. Not only that, the most important thing is that there is a secret hidden in the holy crown of the Death Monarch. 3 purple-black round gems were inlaid on the top of the holy crown, the largest one in the center, and 2 smaller ones on both sides. 3 soul centers. When Shen Xian thought of this, a voice rang in his ears. "Boss, the passage is open, the holy crown of the Lord of Death is inside, right?" The player asked the undead around him, and heard a heavy sound of a boulder moving. He answered, and the voice became extremely surprised. "My God, level 120 boss. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Online game Dungeon Master. Author, Buledin Lao Buledin Si Buledin Me. Chapter 399. In the middle of the tomb is a brand new velvet base, with a peerless treasure placed on it. When dozens of players showed greedy eyes, a terrifying shadow appeared silently behind them. The Soul Warrior Emperor is a level 120 heroic boss. His body is invisible. Like the Shadow Dragon, it is green in color and can absorb 90% of physical attack damage. The death sickle in his hand seems to be cut down instantly. Come on, a huge damage of 35,000 is floating out. The mage was red-blooded on the spot, and Noah, who was commanding them, shouted, "Pay attention to your position, spread out the formation, and monitor the opponent's position." Then, a big battle began. The players were well trained, but unfortunately their equipment was not very high. It was quite difficult to deal with the level 120 boss. After a while, several people were killed. The Soul Warrior Emperor doesn't use control skills. Fortunately, he doesn't have much health, only 1 million. The battle ended after a few minutes, with dozens of players' bodies falling on the ground. The leading player went to get the holy crown of the Lord of Death, but unexpectedly something unexpected happened at this moment. A usually honest and loyal player suddenly jumped in front of everyone and put the holy crown of the Lord of Death into the package. Before everyone could recover, the player used the skill to speed up his movement and ran and disappeared into the cave. Noah yelled, "What's going on? How could he suddenly betray us when he was resurrected on the spot? Go chase him." The players followed, but unfortunately, except for a few thieves, no players had any way to stop them. The players called Resurrection in place threw away hundreds of meters of military power, and Noah had no choice but to inform Steel, who was guarding outside. Resurrected on the spot and snatched away the holy crown of the Lord of Death, Steel frowned and asked in a private message, "Are you sure it's not a magic effect?" "No, there are no negative effects on his status bar," he said. Steel told him, "Don't worry, there are many of our people outside, so there won't be any problems." After Steel finished speaking, he stood up, walked to the deck and ordered the players who were still resting in the cabin to get up immediately. Then, the players ran out to prepare for the gathering. Steel can't figure out who is causing the trouble, but there won't be any other answer except the people over there. Otherwise, how could an unknown player give up his career for a treasure? You know, if you do this, you can even sell it for hundreds. 10,000 yuan, but there is absolutely no way to spend it. He thought about whether he was a spy. Heaven was very confident in his testing methods, and it should be impossible for people on the other side to sneak in. "Everyone, there is a group of people who are plotting to take away the holy crown of the Death Lord. We have to intercept them," he said to the players below. Under the influence of the magic interference barrier, the material teleportation technique is unable to work. The other side will definitely send elites to respond. I ordered the first team to search to the west, and the second team to search to the east. Notify the 2 sentry personnel to increase the search intensity and not let go of anything suspicious. Steele said seriously, and then another player stepped on entering this world through the gate of space. Why are you here, Blood? Steele was a little confused. The man opposite, who was a sharpshooter, waved his hand and smiled. After all, I am also a top 100 player in the country. Don't you need my help? Under the black screen, he was resurrected and running. He wanted to quit the game, but he knew that he still couldn't control the character's actions. His body was controlled. I heard that there is a way to control others in the magic system of the orcs, undead, and devils. I felt that I must have encountered such a thing when I was resurrected, but I couldn't figure out what to do. Because the opponent did not give himself a chance to solve the problem at all, as if he was familiar with his profession. He moved flexibly, dodged the pursuit of players again and again, and used detours to bypass the pursuers. Such operations and techniques were obviously a master is controlling his body. There is no way to chat privately, and there is no way to know the latest monitoring status when offline, so the current resurrection in place is in a dilemma. After walking for half an hour in the desolate wilderness, he walked dozens of kilometers. Although there were people in the sky monitoring him, unfortunately the other party did not make any offensive moves against him. Players on the ground could not catch up with him because they controlled themselves. People in the body know the map well and never encounter a dead end while walking. What he didn't know was that the blood sitting on the back of the giant eagle in the sky did not choose to attack him because he was commanding the army to encircle him. Several player teams were directly bypassing them to intercept them in front of the resurrection. The winner will be determined soon. In Kalando's Kingdom of God, Shen Xian controlled the resurrected body. I didn't expect that your moves are quite coquettish, Christopher observed. With your level, why don't you become a magician? Maybe you can play a greater role. Has the response person arrived? Shen Xian did not answer his words. His current APM has reached more than 500, and he is controlling the actions of two people almost at the same time. We are here, but I estimate that our army will be intercepted. After all, we are in the hinterland of the Pale Hand and the Free Alliance. Christopher answered him, hundreds of fast-moving followers of the Dragonvein Society, with an average level of 40, the conductor can support the opponent for a long time. It's just. Chris added, they have a 10,000 man soul warrior group behind them. Shen Xian nodded, I know, but we can't have too much hope. Our action was too late. When we predicted the exact location of the soul center, the other party had been preparing for several days. I don't believe they will waste this time. Shen Xian was a little surprised how Heaven got the information about the soul center, and learned that he was looking for it. You know, this epic item cannot be found on the list, and the gods are much weaker than the devil in knowing the future. Could it be that there are other powerful gods helping them? I will investigate, haha, don't worry, Chris said to Shen Xian after hearing his doubts. Okay, if it doesn't work, execute the second plan immediately. A fully armed army appeared in the field of vision of resurrection on the spot. Is it the support of the other party? It seems to be a member of the scattered organization in the north, and Blood in the Sky made a signal, and more than 1,000 soldiers rushed out immediately. Unable to dodge, Shen Xian had no way to monitor the other party when he was controlling the resurrection on the spot. It seemed that they were planning to wipe out all of his people. It didn't matter. Shen Xian immediately took over the command of the other party when he was controlling the resurrection on the spot. Several strong dragon guards rushed up and fought with the players. Online game DungeonMaster. Author, Buletin Lao Buletin Si Buletin Me. Chapter 400. NPCs' combat skills were definitely not as rich as the players in front of them. Shen Xian realized at a glance that he was facing a group of well-trained professional players. Only they could achieve such cooperation, neat and uniform, like a terrible special forces. He ordered the flying dragons in the sky and the dragon people underground to block them. Relying on their huge size, it was not easy for players to pass through this group of opponents. However, Shen Xian did not fight them hard at the beginning, but fled to the north under the strict protection of a group of dragon people. Nearly 1,000 players, maybe they were hired by some big force to deal with him. He had to avoid their sharp edge. If he rushed directly, he would definitely not get a good result. The dragon guards formed an iron wall and blocked the players for 3 or 4 minutes. This time Blood personally came out and stood on the giant eagle in the sky to shoot from several kilometers away. His field of vision was terrifyingly large, and his arrows were not deviated by the wind. He only had more than 10,000 health points when he was resurrected on the spot. The previous pursuit consumed nearly half of it. Blood only needed 1 shot to kill him. However, he suddenly stopped. The tiny resurrection on the spot formed a sharp contrast with the Gundam dragon guards. Unless they were elves, they could not penetrate and hit. He hesitated. How could these players protect the resurrection on the spot so well? He tried to attack by vertical shooting, but unfortunately a flying dragon immediately blocked the view directly above the resurrection on the spot. It was airtight and there was no flaw. Blood had no choice but to give up. It was useless to just shrink. He stared down and commanded the players to surround him, wanting to see what the other party would do. With his sight, Shen Xian had no way to get rid of the pursuit. There was magic interference from the sea around him. Any magic fluctuation would cause backlash and hurt the mage. There were nearly 1,000 people in front of him, and there was a soul warrior group chasing him dozens of kilometers away. But what if the other party had a loophole? Shen Xian prepared several plans to get the soul center, but he would not use the second plan until the first plan failed. The dragons were sent out one by one, sacrificing pawns to save the chariot. Compared with them, the importance of the soul center is very great. A divine weapon means a deterrent like a nuclear weapon. Imagine the horror of the purgatory angels destroying the world like before. Hundreds of thousands of troops were wiped out overnight, but no one would easily invade. Shen Xian is very good at controlling. On the one hand, he let the dragon warriors die in turn to block the players' attacks again and again, and on the other hand, he asked the players around him for potions to replenish his blood and escape to the north. Half an hour later, both sides suffered heavy casualties. The health of the dragon guards was very high, but Shen Xian only sent a few each time. He needed to use a few to fight against dozens of players' simultaneous attacks, which was impossible when the level difference was not big. "What's the matter? Why haven't you surrounded him yet?" Blood questioned the players below with some anger. The players below were also innocent in command. The other party was like sticky candy, pestering their army, and there was no way to complete the task. The dragon race is huge and strong, which means that they will be pushed away by the shield wall and cannot be effectively intercepted. But, the pursuers from the north will come in an hour, and the enemy's reinforcements will definitely not be able to break through the encirclement of the pursuers, the player replied tremblingly. "Don't be lucky." Blood thought for a while. Have you forgotten the reward? You can only get it if you get the holy crown of the Lord of Death, 100,000 per person. Thinking of this, the commanding player nodded, thinking that so many of his people died, but if he got nothing, he simply couldn't tolerate such a thing happening. The army stepped up the pursuit. Under the encouragement of the players, the morale of the soldiers was higher. Facing the pressure of the dragon race, there was no hesitation. For a while, the soldiers who were responsible for being meat shields in the back actually felt that they couldn't stand it. Resurrect on the spot. If this goes on, I'm afraid we won't be able to escape. The players who protected him were anxious, but they were not afraid of death, because the mission instructions said that as long as the holy crown of the Lord of Death was there, they could get the mission reward. Shen Xian, who was called to resurrect on the spot, told them to surround him and not to think about anything. The players still had doubts in their hearts, not knowing where the future would go. After walking 10 kilometers, a new reinforcement appeared. Steel had at least arranged 3 lines of defense, which made it difficult for Shen Qian to fly away unless he sent out a large army. And this is the hinterland of the south, how can the army easily get in? After several rounds of attack and defense, there were less than 100 people left around him. Blood's face was slightly relaxed. The players below looked like they were about to win and ordered the magician to start concentrated attacks. Magic beams were released, each causing more than 3,000 damage in a small area. The health of the resurrected on the spot decreased rapidly, and they were about to be killed. Execute the second plan. Chris looked at the battlefield from the side. The other side was outnumbered and could not be resolved by such an army. Shen Qian said to several players around him, "Please come over. I have something to say to you." He whispered a few words into the ears of several players of levels 50, 70, and 90. The players' faces changed and they nodded. At this time, Blood aimed arrows at them, ready to wait for them to show a flaw and kill them instantly and revive them on the spot at any time. But he didn't have this chance, because the mage standing behind began to increase the attack output and average the output to destroy all their enemies. Suddenly, Blood's face changed. "Stop attacking. Terminate all the mage spells." He shouted loudly, but it was too late. The resurrection on the spot and several players around him suffered thousands of points of damage at the same time. The resurrection on the spot with the lowest health without potions fell down first. The crown of the Death Monarch suddenly burst out, and before the player had time to rejoice, the level 70 dragon player around him immediately picked up the treasure. Less than a second later, the level 70 player fell down next to him, and the crown of the Death Monarch burst out again. Several players with quick reactions saw the opponent's conspiracy and wanted to stop it. Unfortunately, when the level 90 player picked up the treasure for the third time, he died, and the crown of the Death Monarch did not burst out as the player expected. "Quick, tell Steel to investigate the nearest level 5 territory." Blood looked at the group of players. He couldn't say they didn't work hard, but he could not do it. Not everyone could understand what he meant. This time, the cunning enemy escaped in such a damn way. Players without territories will automatically respawn in the nearest city after death. They will not be attacked because of their faction, unless they are being hunted.